Welcome to Deep Psyche. Let's speak with clarity, not cruelty. Stupidity is not merely a lack of intelligence. It is a pattern of unconscious behavior that keeps a man small, reactive, and blind to his own self-sabotage. The tragedy isn't just that he makes mistakes, it's that he keeps making them, unaware that the true enemy is within. He doesn't learn, he doesn't reflect. Instead of asking, "What is this trying to teach me?" he points outward at the world, at others, at fate. As Carl Jung profoundly observed, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. The foolish man walks through life asleep, convinced that luck, timing, or betrayal are to blame. But in truth, his suffering is self-authored, born from unseen patterns, unexamined wounds, and habits he mistakes for personality. Stupidity, then, is not an intellectual failure. It is a spiritual one. It is the refusal to wake up, to question, to grow, to confront the darker corners of the psyche. He lives on autopilot, a slave to the very instincts and assumptions he never dares to examine. But here's the hard truth. Stupidity is not a fixed condition. It is a choice. And if we do not confront these unconscious behaviors within ourselves, we risk becoming the very person we pity, or worse, the one we despise. So if you seek clarity, if you want to recognize these traps before they claim your life, listen closely. Here are 7 undeniable signs of a foolish man. First and foremost, he believes he already knows everything. Nothing reveals a man's ignorance more clearly than his refusal to learn. The foolish man clings to his own opinions as if they are sacred truths, never questioning their origin, never testing them against new evidence. He doesn't evolve, he defends. He resists growth because growth would mean admitting he might be wrong. As the Bible puts it in Proverbs 18:2, a fool takes no pleasure in understanding, but only in expressing his opinion. And as Carl Jung warned, thinking is difficult, that's why most people judge. This kind of man doesn't think, he reacts. He argues confidently about things he barely understands. He dismisses the advice of wiser minds, scoffs at unfamiliar ideas, and wears his ignorance like armor. Psychologists call this the Dunning-Kruger effect, a cognitive bias where those with the least competence tend to overestimate their abilities. The truly wise recognize the vastness of what they don't know. The foolish man, by contrast, is convinced that his shallow pool of knowledge is an ocean. He watches a single YouTube video and thinks he's an expert. He confuses anecdote with evidence. He speaks with conviction, not from understanding, but from ego. And as a result, he pushes people away. He becomes the man no one wants to talk to, arrogant, uninformed, and utterly blind to his own blind spots. And what does this cost him? Everything. He stops growing. He repeats the same mistakes. His relationships deteriorate, his career stalls, and his world slowly shrinks. Because if a man believes he already knows all he needs to know, he'll never seek to become more than he is. He becomes stagnant, a relic of who he once was, frozen in place while the world moves on. The wise man does the opposite. He remains a student of life. He asks questions, reads deeply, listens carefully. He surrounds himself with people who challenge him, not flatter him. He welcomes discomfort because he knows that discomfort is where growth lives. As Socrates said, a wise man knows that he knows nothing. But the foolish man not only refuses to learn, he also refuses to take responsibility. When he fails, he blames others. When his plans fall apart, he blames the system, society, or fate. He sees himself as a victim of circumstance, never the author of his own life. If he's broke, it's the economy's fault. If he's alone, it's because women are the problem. If he's unhealthy, it's genetics. Never once does he pause to ask, what part did I play in this? Because to do so would be painful. To accept responsibility would mean confronting his own flaws. And that level of self-awareness requires strength he doesn't have. But Jung reminds us, until you confront your shadow, until you bring what is unconscious into the light, it will continue to shape your life, and you will continue to call it fate. So if a man refuses to learn, refuses to grow, and refuses to take ownership of his life, he is not simply misinformed. Second, he is trapped in the prison of his own making. And no prison is more secure than the one built by pride and maintained by fear. But here's the uncomfortable truth. People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own souls. Carl Jung. And that is exactly what the foolish man does. He runs from himself. Instead of confronting his flaws, he builds an elaborate fortress of excuses to protect his fragile ego. What happens when a man refuses to take responsibility? He stays stuck, year after year, repeating the same patterns, trapped in the same frustrations. He loses the respect of others because over time, people see through the performance. Most tragically, he loses power over his own life. Because here's the harsh reality. When you blame others, you hand them control. The very moment you say, "It's not my fault," is the moment you surrender your ability to change. That's the dividing line between the fool and the wise. The fool blames the world. The wise man adapts. The fool finds excuses. The wise man finds a way forward. The fool avoids discomfort. The wise man embraces it, knowing growth lives on the other side of pain. That's why foolish men remain bitter, broke, and stagnant, while wise men continue to evolve, succeed, and transcend their former selves. So ask yourself honestly, are you taking full ownership of your life? Or are you secretly clinging to the role of the victim? Because how you answer that question shapes everything. Third, he cannot control his emotions. One of the clearest signs of a foolish man is emotional volatility. He is not guided by thought, reflection, or clarity. He is ruled by raw reaction. He doesn't respond. He erupts. The hot-tempered man sees every inconvenience as a personal attack. Traffic, a slow text reply, a challenge to his opinion, all spark an explosion. He thinks this proves strength, but it's really a display of inner weakness. The overreactor spirals over minor setbacks. Every small issue feels catastrophic. The impulsive man lives in chaos, spending recklessly, quitting jobs in anger, burning bridges with careless words. His life is a storm, and he's not the captain, he's the shipwreck. Carl Jung warned, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. For the emotionally undisciplined man, his unconscious mind is the pilot, and it's steering him straight into ruin. He doesn't think. He doesn't reflect. He reacts. And when things collapse, he blames others. He mistakes rage for power. He believes dominance comes from loudness. But the truth is stark. A man who cannot master himself will always be mastered by others. If your emotions control you, then so does anyone who knows how to trigger you. You become manipulable, fragile, and unpredictable. Your mood becomes a puppet to circumstances, and ultimately, you self-sabotage, destroying opportunities, trust, and relationships without even realizing why. In contrast, the wise man stays calm under pressure. He understands that emotions are real, but not always reliable. He doesn't suppress what he feels, but he doesn't let it dictate his actions. As Proverbs 29:11 says, "A fool gives full vent to his anger, but a wise man quietly holds it back." The truly strong man isn't the one who yells the loudest or hits the hardest. It's the one who pauses, thinks, and chooses a higher response. Here's what wise men do instead. They pause before reacting. They use emotion as a signal, not a command. They redirect anger into discipline. They practice self-awareness, recognizing when emotions begin to cloud their judgment, and choose clarity over chaos. If a man cannot control his emotions, he cannot control his future. True strength is emotional mastery, and without it, a man is a danger to himself and to everyone around him. Fourth, he surrounds himself with fools. A man's circle is not just a reflection, it's a prophecy. Who you choose to spend your time with reveals where you're headed. Look at a man's closest companions, and you can often predict his future. A foolish man surrounds himself with the worst kind of influences. Chronic complainers who see problems in every solution. Lazy drifters who waste hours on meaningless distractions. Echo chambers, so-called friends who never challenge him, never question his decisions, and only feed his ego. The aimless, who offer no vision, no ambition, and no standard to rise to. Instead of seeking mentors, he clings to people who demand nothing of him. As Johann Wolfgang von Goethe once said, "Tell me who you spend time with, and I will tell you who you are." The foolish man fears growth, not because he can't grow, but because growth requires discomfort, and discomfort requires humility. He avoids the company of people who are sharper, wiser, more disciplined, because they force him to confront a truth he's afraid to face. He is not yet who he could be, so instead of leveling up, he chooses to be the tallest dwarf in a room full of small thinkers. It feels good, but it stunts his evolution. Carl Jung believed that we unconsciously absorb the energy, thoughts, and behaviors of those around us. If you surround yourself with chaos, you become chaotic. If you live among the undisciplined, your own discipline will erode. If you stay in an environment of failure, mediocrity becomes your baseline. A man whose friends are broke, bitter, and blind to growth isn't just keeping bad company. He's looking in a mirror. But the wise man does something different. He intentionally surrounds himself with people who elevate him, mentors who've walked further and know more, challengers who call out his flaws and demand his best, winners whose habits, standards, and mindset pull him higher. The wise man isn't afraid to be the weakest in the room because he understands that iron sharpens iron. He knows the room is shaping him, and he chooses rooms that stretch him. A foolish man is shaped by his environment. A wise man shapes his environment. So ask yourself honestly, who are you becoming by proximity? If your closest friends are directionless, unmotivated, and undisciplined, you're not an exception. You're next. Fifth, he chases pleasure instead of discipline. A man who cannot govern his desires will be governed by them. The foolish man is ruled by impulse. He avoids challenge, resists structure, and clings to comfort. Rather than pursuing growth, he seeks escape. Through cheap pleasures and quick dopamine hits, he numbs boredom with endless scrolling. He quiets loneliness with fleeting intimacy. He silences discomfort with alcohol, junk food, or fantasy worlds. But each indulgence steals a piece of his potential. Carl Jung saw the human psyche as a battleground between the higher self and the shadow, the primitive, unconscious forces that pull us away from purpose. When a man constantly chases pleasure, he isn't living freely, he's being led by his lower self. He becomes a servant to desire, mistaking indulgence for freedom, and society makes it easy. Everything today is designed to reward weakness. Feel sad? There's a substance for that. Feel bored? There's a screen for that. Feel insecure? There's a filtered, fake world to hide in. But here's the quiet tragedy. A man who always chooses what feels good now wakes up one day with nothing real to show for it. His health has deteriorated, his mind has dulled, his potential has atrophied. The foolish man asks, "What brings me pleasure today?" The wise man asks, "What will build my future?" The fool wastes his hours on entertainment. The wise man trains his mind, body, and discipline. The fool spends recklessly to impress others. The wise man builds wealth with intention. The fool avoids discomfort. The wise man seeks it, knowing that discipline is the crucible of greatness. As Proverbs 21:20 says, "The wise store up choice food and olive oil, but fools gulp theirs down." History's greatest men, philosophers, generals, sages, did not rise by accident. They practiced restraint. They rose early, trained their minds, shaped their character, and served a mission beyond momentary pleasure. They understood that true strength is self-mastery. Pleasure is not the enemy, but for the fool it becomes the god. The wise man, by contrast, enjoys life, but he is never ruled by it. He knows if you cannot master yourself, the world will master you. Sixth, he never learns from his mistakes. The most dangerous form of ignorance is the refusal to learn. A man who continues to make the same mistakes, despite life's repeated lessons, is not merely careless, he is enslaved by unconscious patterns. No matter how many second chances life gives him, he walks blindly into the same traps. Whether in love, finances, health, or personal growth. You've seen it. The man who keeps dating toxic partners and wonders why he ends up heartbroken. The one who repeats poor financial decisions and lives in constant struggle. The one who indulges in laziness, procrastination, or addiction, hoping for change without changing himself. Carl Jung called this repetition compulsion, the unconscious drive to repeat old wounds and patterns because they feel familiar, even when they lead to pain. The fool doesn't stop to ask, why does this keep happening to me? Instead, he casts blame on bad luck, on others, on life itself. But life, Jung reminds us, is always offering us a mirror if we dare to look. Life is a ruthless teacher. It will repeat the same lesson until we finally learn. Einstein said it well. Insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results. The difference between a wise man and a fool isn't that the wise never fail, both stumble, both fall, but the wise reflect. They study their missteps. They extract meaning from pain. The fool runs from discomfort. The wise man walks into it and asks, what is this trying to teach me? If you don't learn from your history, you are doomed to repeat it again and again until either awakening or collapse. So ask yourself, are you evolving or just recycling the past? Seventh, he talks more than he listens. A foolish man loves the sound of his own voice. He interrupts, dominates, rarely asks, and almost never listens. But wisdom begins in silence. Why is this important? Because listening is how we grow. It is through listening that we learn new perspectives, deepen relationships, and cultivate humility. A man who cannot listen is a man closed off from transformation, and a man closed off from transformation will remain stagnant forever. Breaking free, the path to true intelligence. So how do you avoid falling into these traps? How do you rise above the patterns that keep most men stuck? 1. Be brutally honest with yourself. Stop lying to yourself. Stop blaming others. Ask, where am I repeating mistakes? What patterns keep showing up? Jung once said, people will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul. But without self-confrontation, there is no real growth. 2. Kill your ego and stay humble. A foolish man assumes he knows. A wise man questions everything. Stay curious. Be open to correction. The moment you think you've arrived is the moment your decline begins. 3. Master emotional discipline. Fools are ruled by emotions, rage, jealousy, fear. The wise feel deeply, but act deliberately. A man who cannot master himself will be mastered by something else. 4. Surround yourself with smarter people. Growth requires environment. If you're the most capable man in your circle, you're in the wrong circle. Seek mentors. Avoid enablers. Jim Rohn said, you are the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. Choose wisely. 5. Turn every mistake into a lesson. You will make mistakes. That's part of the process. But the question is, do you evolve or do you repeat? A fool falls and blames the floor. A wise man studies the fall and learns how to walk stronger. Final thought, intelligence is a choice. Stupidity isn't permanent unless you choose to keep repeating it. You have the power to change, but it requires brutal self-honesty, humility, discipline, and courage. Most men won't do this. They'll keep blaming life. But if you've read this far, you're not most men. You want growth, you want clarity, you want to break free from old cycles and step into your potential. So begin now. Be honest. Stay humble. Reflect deeply. Surround yourself with truth. And above all, keep learning. Thank you for walking this path with me. In a world full of noise, distraction, and surface-level advice, the fact that you've made it here, seeking depth, truth, and self-understanding, already sets you apart. Carl Jung once said, your vision will become clear only when you look into your own heart. Who looks outside dreams. Who looks inside awakens. If this message resonated with something deep within you, I invite you to stay connected. Subscribe, not just to this channel, but to the lifelong journey of self-awareness. Share this with someone who's ready to break free from unconscious patterns and step into who they were meant to become. And most importantly, reflect. Turn knowledge into transformation, because real change doesn't happen in the mind alone, it begins in the soul. Welcome to the path of inner awakening. Let's keep walking it together.